The day my company celebrated my 40 years of service was the exact moment I realized my daughter Claire only viewed me as a well-funded safety net. The ballroom lights dimmed as the event coordinator stepped toward the podium, smiling at the hundreds of employees, executives, and guests gathered inside the downtown Columbus Convention Center. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice echoing through the massive room. "Today, we honor a woman whose dedication has shaped our logistics division for 4 decades. The giant screens behind her illuminated with photographs from another lifetime. There I was, in 1984, wearing an oversized safety vest on the warehouse floor. Another photo showed me standing beside coworkers who had long since retired or passed away. Then came pictures from company picnics, charity fundraisers, and countless retirement parties where I had stood in the back, applauding everyone else. Today, it was finally my turn. The applause rolled through the ballroom. I offered a polite practice smile, but my eyes kept drifting toward the front row. One chair remained conspicuously empty. It carried a small, heavy cardstock reservation reserved for Claire Walsh, my only daughter. The camera operating the live feed followed my gaze. The audience followed the camera. Even before a single word was spoken, everyone in that room understood the heavy implication. That seat was supposed to belong to my family. Instead, it belonged to a glaring silence. The coordinator noticed. She leaned down from the edge of the stage with an apologetic smile. "Ms. Walsh, would you like us to wait 5 more minutes?" I shook my head immediately. "No." She hesitated, glancing at the empty chair. "Would you like someone else to sit beside you?" I looked across the dimly lit ballroom. Standing near the exit doors was a nervous young man wearing a faded gray suit that clearly hadn't been tailored but had been carefully pressed. His hands were folded neatly in front of him. I raised my hand and gestured toward him. "Julian." His eyes widened in shock. The audience turned toward the back of the room. "Would you come sit with me?" I asked, my voice steady. Julian slowly walked down the center aisle, looking as though he might trip over his own feet. He sat in the empty chair beside me. I patted his forearm. "Thanks for coming." He swallowed hard. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world, Bernadette." Just then, our CEO walked up to the microphone holding a sealed envelope that was about to change everything. Our CEO, Richard, adjusted the microphone stand, letting the applause fade completely before he spoke. "There is one final surprise today." I frowned slightly, adjusting my glasses. I had helped organize company events for years, and nobody had informed me about any deviations from the printed schedule. Richard smiled, looking directly at me. 15 years ago, Bernadette Walsh quietly walked into my office. She turned down a massive executive retention bonus. Instead, she asked that the company take those funds and create a legacy trust, honoring loyalty, sacrifice, and service to the community. Murmurs of surprise rippled across the crowded ballroom. Even the executives sitting in the second row looked stunned. "Today," Richard continued, his voice carrying a sudden weight, "that fund officially matures, and the agreement came with one unbreakable condition. The very first recipient would be personally selected by Bernadette herself." Every camera in the room pivoted toward me. I kept my posture perfectly straight. Richard turned his attention to the young man sitting beside me. "Julian Davis, please come up here." Julian froze entirely. He looked at me completely bewildered. What is he talking about? "Go on," I nudged him gently. Julian practically stumbled up the short stairs to the stage. Richard shook his trembling hand and turned to the audience. "So, today, we are honored to present Julian Davis with an $800,000 legacy gift, debt-free and clear." The ballroom exploded. People leaped to their feet. The cheers were deafening. Several older employees in the front rows wiped their eyes. Julian stared at the ceremonial certificate Richard handed him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, he leaned into the microphone. There. There has to be a mistake. I can't take this. I stood up from my seat, ignoring the cameras, and looked right into his panicked eyes. There hasn't been a mistake, Julian. You earned this. 3 hours later, I sat alone in the quiet cabin of my Subaru in my driveway. The adrenaline of the ceremony had finally worn off, leaving me feeling strangely hollow. I reached into my purse and pulled out my cell phone. The screen was completely lit up with notifications. I scrolled through them slowly. 112 missed calls. Most were from Claire. The rest were from her husband, Greg. Mixed in were furious text messages, frantic voicemails, and alerts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade. I stared at the glowing screen for several long seconds. Then, I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat and turned off the engine. The chaos unfolding on the internet had actually begun years earlier inside this very house. Until 5 years ago, I never imagined my own daughter would treat me like a burden. After my husband died, Claire and I drifted apart. She married Greg, focused on her career, and my role shifted into a mere convenience. I became the emergency dog sitter for spontaneous trips and the silent ATM when her kitchen remodel went over budget. Whenever Claire did visit, she spent the time scrolling on her phone or borrowing my credit card for essentials. I never argued, hoping she'd eventually outgrow this selfish phase. Then came the phone call exactly 24 hours before my retirement ceremony. "Hey, Mom." Claire started, her voice unnaturally bright. "Greg found an unbelievable last-minute deal for a resort in Cabo. We leave tomorrow morning." I froze. The morning of my 40-year ceremony. "I thought it was in the evening," she deflected quickly. "But the flights are non-refundable. I've been so stressed at work." "You understand, right?" I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Looking out the window, I simply saw the truth for what it was. "Have fun in Cabo, Claire," I said calmly. "You're not mad. We'll do dinner next week, I promise." "Don't worry about it," I answered and hung up. I didn't wallow or send a guilt-tripping text. Instead, I walked to the kitchen counter, picked up my address book, and dialed someone who actually deserved to sit in that chair. Julian answered on the second ring. "Bernadette, is everything okay with the house?" "The house is fine, Julian," I said. "I have a favor to ask. My company is holding my retirement ceremony tomorrow afternoon." "I remember," he said instantly. "You mentioned it last month when I was fixing your gutters." "Claire won't be coming," I stated flatly. "I would like someone sitting beside me. Are you available?" There was no hesitation, no checking his schedule, no asking what kind of food would be served. "I'll be there," he promised. I'd be honored. Julian was the son of my late best friend, Martha. Martha and I had worked in the same logistics warehouse in the 80s. When my husband died, Martha spent 2 weeks sleeping on my sofa just to make sure I ate dinner. When she passed away from breast cancer 7 years ago, Julian was only 22, working as a mechanic to pay for community college. He never asked me for a dime. But every winter, without being asked, my driveway was shoveled. Every autumn, my gutters were cleaned. Julian became a high school shop teacher, dedicating his life to helping kids who couldn't afford college learn a trade. He showed up, consistently, quietly, without expectation of a reward. The next afternoon, Julian met me outside the convention center. He wore a gray suit that had seen better days, holding a small wrapped box. "You didn't have to bring a gift," I scolded him lightly. He smiled. "It's just a coffee mug. You've looked out for me since Mom died. It's the least I could do." As we walked into the lobby, my phone buzzed. Claire had just posted a photo on social media. She and Greg were sitting by a sparkling blue pool in Cabo, holding matching cocktails. The caption read, "Finally, taking the luxury break we deserve." escaping the noise. I didn't feel a sting of sadness anymore. I just felt clarity. I locked my phone, slipped it into my purse, and walked into the ballroom with Julian. I knew exactly what I was about to do. The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Coworkers I hadn't spoken to in years lined up to shake my hand. The local news crew rushed the stage, practically shoving microphones into Julian's face. Julian looked like he was going to pass out. I gently pulled him away from the reporters and guided him into a quiet hallway near the catering kitchen. "Bernadette, I can't take this," he stammered, holding the ceremonial folder as if it were on fire. "This is your money. This is Claire's inheritance." I stopped walking and looked him dead in the eye. "That money isn't a reward for today, Julian. It's recognition for the man you've been for the last 7 years. You use that money to fund your school's workshop. You buy yourself a house. You build a life. But Claire made her choice." I interrupted firmly. "Go home, Julian. Celebrate." By the time I drove back to my house and parked the Subaru, the internet had done its job. The local broadcast had been clipped and shared online. The image of the empty chair with Claire's name on it, followed by Julian receiving the massive check, was everywhere. I picked up my phone from the passenger seat. As I unlocked the front door of my house, the phone rang again. Claire's name flashed across the screen. This time, I pressed accept. "Hello, Claire. Are you out of your mind?" she shrieked. The background noise sounded like an airport terminal. "You gave away $800,000 to Martha's kid. On live television." I placed my keys on the entryway table. He showed up. "I am your daughter," she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "Greg and I are at the airport. We left the resort. We paid $2,000 for emergency flights back to Columbus. We are coming over right now to fix this. Drive safely," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I ended the call. I didn't feel intimidated, and I certainly didn't feel guilty. I walked straight into my kitchen, opened my laptop, and decided it was time to finalize my retirement. I didn't sit nervously by the window waiting for Claire to arrive. I had work to do. I opened my web browser and logged into my banking portal. For 3 years, Claire had possessed a shiny silver credit card linked directly to my primary account. It was originally meant for absolute emergencies, but lately, those emergencies included luxury hair appointments, expensive dinners, and apparently a spontaneous vacation to Cabo. I clicked the tab labeled Authorized Users. I found Claire's name. I clicked Remove, confirmed the choice, and closed the laptop. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. Next, I walked down the hall to the spare bedroom. It had become a dumping ground for Claire's overflow. Expensive winter coats she rarely wore, old college textbooks, and boxes of seasonal decorations she didn't have space for in her own large house. I grabbed 3 large cardboard boxes from the garage. I worked methodically, folding the coats and tossing the decorations into the boxes. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it was my house, and I was done living in a storage unit for someone who couldn't spare 2 hours for my 40-year milestone. I dragged the boxes to the front hallway just as headlights swept across my living room curtains. A car door slammed, then another. Heavy footsteps stomped up the porch stairs. A key rattled aggressively in the deadbolt, and the front door flew open. Claire stormed into the entryway, dragging a small, rolling suitcase, her face red with sunburn and fury. Greg trailed behind her, looking utterly exhausted and deeply uncomfortable. Claire kicked her suitcase aside and pointed a shaking finger at me. "How could you do this to us? You completely humiliated me." I didn't flinch. I reached over to the wooden key hook on the wall, extended my hand, and looked right at her. "Before we start, I said calmly. I'll take my house key back. Claire stared at my extended hand as if I had just asked her to chop off a finger. Are you serious right now? She demanded, stepping further into the hallway. You give a fortune to a complete stranger and you want to talk about a house key. Julian isn't a stranger, I replied, keeping my hand out. And it is my house. The key, Claire. Greg shifted uncomfortably, pulling his own copy of my house key from his pocket. He unhooked it from his ring and placed it in my palm without a word. Claire glared at him but angrily dug into her designer purse, slapping her key into my hand next. I dropped them both into my pocket. Thank you. You did this on purpose? Claire snapped, her chest heaving. You set this up to make me look like a horrible daughter on national television. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't set anything up. I reserved a chair for my daughter. My daughter decided a margarita in Cabo was more important than my retirement. The cameras simply recorded the reality of our relationship. I told you I was stressed, she yelled, following me. I told you Greg and I needed a break. I never asked you to stop taking breaks, I said, leaning against the counter. I never asked you for money. I never asked you to take care of me. I asked you for 3 hours of your time on the biggest professional day of my life, and you lied to me. I didn't lie. You booked those tickets 3 weeks ago, Claire, not yesterday. I took a sip of water. I saw the date on the itinerary you accidentally left on my printer. Claire froze. The color drained from her sunburned face. Greg looked at the floor, suddenly finding the hardwood pattern fascinating. You spent your whole life expecting me to finance your comfort? I said quietly. You didn't miss a ceremony, Claire. You missed the point entirely. Claire crossed her arms defensively, trying to regain her footing. Fine. I lied about when I booked it. But that doesn't justify giving away $800,000 that should have gone to your actual family. It wasn't an inheritance, I corrected her. It was a company trust. I chose the recipient based on character. Julian checks on me. Julian fixes my furnace. Julian sits with me. You only show up when you need a dog sitter or a deposit for your kitchen. Greg finally cleared his throat. Bernadette, look, we panicked. We tried to rent a car to drive back from the airport, but the card declined. We had to use our own emergency savings. Claire whirled around to face me, her eyes wide. Wait. My credit card declined. Did you freeze my card? It's not your card, I stated plainly. It's my card with your name on it, and it isn't frozen. I canceled it. You can't do that, she gasped. The resort charged a penalty for checking out early. How am I supposed to pay for the rest of this month? You have a 6-figure salary, Claire. You will budget, I said, walking toward the hallway. I gestured to the 3 heavy cardboard boxes sitting by the door. And while you're at it, you can load these into your trunk. I need my guest room back. Claire looked at the boxes, then back at me, pure disbelief masking her features. The safety net she had danced on for years was simply gone. There was no screaming match, no tears, no dramatic ultimatums. I was just dismantling her access to my life piece by piece. Before Claire could launch into another tirade, headlights flashed outside the front window. A truck engine idled in the driveway. Heavy footsteps approached the porch, and a polite knock sounded at the door. I pulled it open. Julian stood there holding a large aluminum tray wrapped in foil. Hey, Bernadette. I figured you wouldn't feel like cooking tonight, so I baked some lasagna. He stopped mid-sentence, noticing Claire and Greg standing in the hallway. The silence in the room became razor sharp. Claire practically lunged toward the door. You, she spat, pointing at Julian. You manipulative thief. You planned this with her, didn't you? Sucking up to an old woman to steal my money? Julian stepped back, his face flushing dark red, holding the tray of lasagna against his chest. He looked terrified. Claire, I swear I didn't know anything about the money. I stepped squarely between my daughter and Julian. I didn't raise my voice, but my tone left zero room for negotiation. "Do not speak to him that way in my house," I ordered. "He stole from me," Claire yelled, tears of frustration finally spilling over. "He's just some mechanic's kid playing charity case." "He is a teacher," I fired back, stepping closer to her. "He works 60 hours a week. He doesn't take expensive vacations on his mother's dime. He earns everything he has. If you were half as decent as he is, that empty chair wouldn't have been empty." Greg reached out and grabbed Claire's arm. "Claire, stop. Let's just go." "No," she snapped, yanking her arm away. She looked at me, her face twisting into a sneer. "You're going to regret this. If you kick me out right now, don't expect me to call you when you're sick. Don't expect me to be there." I looked at my only child, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. "Claire, you were never there to begin with." She stared at me, waiting for me to break, waiting for the mother who always caved to apologize. When I simply maintained eye contact, the reality finally hit her. She turned on her heel, grabbed her suitcase, and marched out the door. Greg grabbed one of the cardboard boxes, offered me a pitiful, silent nod, and hurried out after her. Julian watched their car back out of the driveway. "I'm so sorry, Bernadette." "Don't be," I said, closing the front door and locking the deadbolt with a satisfying click. "Now, let's go eat that lasagna." The weeks following the ceremony were surprisingly quiet. I didn't experience the terrible heartbreak society tells mothers they should feel when estranged from their children. Instead, I felt like I had finally set down a heavy backpack I had been carrying for a decade. Claire tested my boundaries exactly once. 3 weeks later, she sent a text message complaining that her auto insurance, which had been secretly drafted from my account for years, had lapsed. I replied with a single sentence: "You are a married adult with a good job. It is time to manage your own bills." She never replied. I didn't lose sleep over it. I simply went to the bank, opened a new primary checking account, and moved all my funds, ensuring no hidden auto payments would ever slip through again. Meanwhile, Julian wasted no time. He used a portion of the legacy fund to buy advanced machinery for his high school robotics and shop classes. The rest, he placed into a trust to provide scholarships for students entering the trades. When the local newspaper tried to interview him about it, he simply credited the generosity of his late mother's best friend. He still came over every other Sunday to check my gutters, bringing coffee and terrible jokes. I officially retired exactly 1 month after the ceremony. I didn't move to a luxury resort, and I didn't buy a fancy car. I stayed in my comfortable house, planted a massive vegetable garden in the backyard, and finally read the stack of books on my nightstand. Sometimes people hold on to toxic family members because they are terrified of the silence that comes when they leave. But what I learned is that silence isn't always lonely. When you stop funding the illusion of a family, you make room for the people who actually value your presence. I didn't lose a daughter that day in the convention center. I simply accepted the truth, locked my front door, and finally started living for myself.